Hi, and welcome to the Sound Tweakers podcast. My name is Norbert Weyer. I'm a freelance sound engineer working in mixing, mastering, and post-production. This podcast covers the artistic, technical, and business side of being a freelance sound engineer. If you'd like additional information about this episode, please check the show notes on future-sonic.com. There you can also sign up for my newsletter and stay in the loop about future posts and podcast episodes. This is the first episode about mixing, and I called it 4 Things to Remember when Receiving Your Material to Mix. Let's get started. The first thing I actually want to talk about happens before you're receiving any source material. Please make sure that you have a signed contract and have received at least some upfront payment as a sign of commitment from your client. Now, I'm not talking about the business side of mixing here, but I find this is really, really important. So don't start working until you've got your terms and fees defined and accepted in a legally binding form. This will save you so many headaches. Of course, it goes without saying, never ever work for free, and ask for some money and some payment upfront because you're going to have some costs that you have to cover. Now, let's talk about actually the second point. What exactly do you need to receive in order to do a good job? The first thing that is very important is, of course, you need a briefing. And the important thing is that you have an idea of where the client wants you to go with your work. It doesn't help you at all if you receive source files and you go into one direction. And once you send the first mix for approval, the client says like, oh, I wasn't expecting anything like that. I want something completely different. So save yourself that headache and ask, in which direction do you want me to go? The second thing that you really want to have is a reference, and that reference should be one single file. You don't want to be in that situation where your client goes like, oh yeah, I want the drums like that band and the vocals like that other band, and I want the guitars like another band yet, because it's really, really difficult to combine all those different elements. It generally doesn't really create something cohesive. So ask the band for one song from an artist that does something that is similar. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it has to be similar to the music that you're going to mix, and that can give you a mixing north. Third thing that you should have is documentation. It can be as simple as knowing what mic positions were used for the certain microphones that you had on the guitar amplifier, for example. And it can be as extensive as knowing which microphone type was used, where was it placed, and what intention is behind that particular track in the session. And then, of course, after the documentation, you have to receive the source files, the project files. And that brings us to point number 3. How should you actually receive those files? Now, if we're talking only about mixing, the normal way to proceed is that you receive consolidated files. One archive, one audio file per track. This is by far the most common way when you work with mixing. Now, in certain situations, it might be interesting for you to receive at least some information or some work that your client has done before. So your client might have used a certain plugin that he really likes. Maybe he's recorded Guitar DI and used Guitar Rig in a certain configuration, and you don't have Guitar Rig. Now, in that case, you can ask your client to print those effects, or alternatively to send you a reference mix and you try to reproduce. The second form of receiving files is, of course, receiving the open session. So if your client works with Pro Tools and you also have Pro Tools available, there's nothing wrong with them sending you the session over. Receiving open sessions is really great if your responsibilities are extending a bit beyond mixing. How do you decide whether to work with consolidated files or open sessions? You decide that based on your client's needs. So you talk to your client before starting a mixing session, you define what exactly needs to be done, and then you define what's the best way for you to receive the files. Now, that brings me to the last point that I want to talk about is what about the file format? This is something that many people have doubts about. Let's say your client recorded in 96 kilohertz, 24 bits. What should the client send you over? The client should send you over files in that resolution. You should neither upsample, neither downsample. You need to receive the files at the resolution that was done while they have been recorded. Now that brings me to a quite interesting question, which is the following. Let's suppose your client recorded at 96 kilohertz, but your interface only goes up to 48K. Can you take the job? Fret not, you can accept the job. What you have to do is you receive the files in high quality, 96 kilohertz, let's say. But when you are mixing, you do an import and you downsample to the maximum sample rate that your computer stands, let's say 48 kilohertz. You do all your mix at 48 kilohertz, and then at the end, you need to find a computer or a studio that has all your plugins and that also has the same Pro Tools version or the same Cubase version that you're working on, and that has an interface that actually goes up to 96 kilohertz. What you do then is you take your session and you re-link the audio files to the high quality audio file. So basically you import all your mixing decisions and you apply those mixing decisions to the high quality audio files at 96 kilohertz and export, which means you could do all your work at your home setup with the low resolution files, 48K, let's say. But when you are preparing the final mix, the final file for export after the client has approved the mix, you either get yourself an interface from a friend that supports up to 96 kilohertz or more, or you go to a studio where you have access to that infrastructure and you export your mix right there. Having said that, probably the most common audio file format that you are going to receive nowadays is 48 kilohertz, 24 bits. Because 48K, 24-bit is a format that pretty much any interface can record and play back nowadays. And it is also a format that is accepted by all streaming services. And if you need to make a CD out of it, which works at slightly lower sample rate and bit depth of 44.1 16-bit, you can always reduce bit depth and sample rate at the point when you are mastering and when you're actually creating the files necessary for creating the CD. That's it for today. 4 things to consider when you are receiving the source files for your next mixing project. If you like the podcast, then please give us a 5-star rating. And if you've got any comment, I'd love to hear from you. As always, you can find show notes on my webpage on future-sonic.com. And if you want to stay in the loop about future podcast episodes, then please sign up for my newsletter. I am going to put a link to that in the show notes too. Thanks for listening. Until next time, remember to make some noise.